A very good evening and welcome to another episode of South Africa Today and Beyond. And in studio today, I'm joined by Sfiso, who's the Executive Chairperson of the National Youth Development Agency. Welcome to the show, Sfiso.
Good evening, Kwara, and to your viewers.
Thank you so much for agreeing to this interview, Sfiso. I think for the benefit of those that don't know what the National Youth Development Agency deals about, what is the mandate of the agency?
Well, the National Youth Development Agency was started in 2008. It was a coming together of two legacy institutions, one being the Mtsweni Youth Fund, which was an agency that dealt with funding for those who have, business ideas, entrepreneurs, SMMEs, and so on. Then the other one was the National Youth Commission, which was advising government on policy, mainstreaming youth development, and so on. So the two institutions came together to form one umbrella body for youth development in South Africa. So if you talk about, mainstreaming youth development, if you talk about coordinating the work of government around youth development, when you talk about funding for SMME, training, research, development. So generally, when you talk about anything that is got to do with young people in South Africa, inside of government, in civil society, in private sector, the NYDA is the umbrella body of all of that.
I mean, there's been quite a shift in the core focus or the core business of the agency in the last couple of years. For example, there isn't a focus anymore on enterprise finance, for example, but more focus on education and skills development. What led to this particular shift in the core focus or core business of the agency?
Well, as I said, the agency itself is an umbrella body. So, but what we do every now and then, we look at what are the challenges that young people are facing at that particular period. You would know over some few years up until now, the issue of education, funding, particularly for education, has been a big issue in South Africa, the issue of skills development, which has led to a big situation of unemployment in South Africa.
Sure.
So we then said that, look, let's put in place systems that will also respond to that. How do we deal with young people who are outside of the schooling system? Is there a way in which we can skill them in order for them to have a particular skill that they can contribute into the economy? Or in fact, we also started the Solomon Mahlangu Scholarship Fund, which is also a response to the funding challenge, right? We have NSFAS, we have all these other things, but as the NYDA, what are we doing? So we also have that. But I think also we did not necessarily fundamentally shift from the issue of funding. I think we do have a grant program currently, which funds anything between 5,000 up to 100,000 for those who are startups, for those who really want assistance with, whether it's acquiring products or, any other system that will assist their businesses to go forward. But I think integrated into that is the issue of how do we train young people who are in business, because many of them, they fail within the first 3 years. So we want to assist them, give them mentorship, ensure that at least that first 3 years they are able to jump it and move forward. So yes, as much as we're looking at skills and development, we're still in that space of entrepreneurship development and so on.
Sure. We're going to come back to the issue around, capacity building, but also how people can access the opportunities that are there at the NYDA, specifically issues around, grants, especially for those who are outside the schooling system as well, rural youth, for example, but also characterizing the fact that, South Africa has a young population, also broadly the African continent itself has a young population, and, we also need to deal with issues of unemployment, access to institutions of higher learning as well. But Sfiso, I mean, you are fairly, a new executive chairperson at the NYDA and the entire board as well. What is the vision of, in your term, what is the vision of the newly appointed board by President Zuma in terms of, looking at the challenges facing young people today? This comes at the backdrop of, for example, social movements like the Fees Must Fall movement that demands, issues around decolonized free education in this country. And you're talking about those issues as well, linking issues around NSFAS as well, and the business and, the activities around the NYDA. What would you say is the vision of you and your board?
Well, firstly, I think one of the challenges that the agency has been facing over the years has been the issue of accessibility. Young people have been saying, look, we hear about the agency, we see it on TV, but on the ground, in the townships, in the rural areas, young people don't know about the NYDA. In fact, in many instances, you find that young people have to travel a long distance just to reach an NYDA office. We've got 15 branches in the country currently, and we're saying that's pathetic from where we're sitting, because in South Africa we have 54 districts alone. I'm not talking about local municipalities, I'm just talking about districts. Yet you have 15 branches of the NYDA. In the Western Cape, for instance, you've got one branch which is in Cape Town. You have an area called Plettenberg Bay, which is 485 km from Cape Town. Now you are saying for that young person to access NYDA, they have to travel 485 km. We said one of the first things that we need to do is to redirect our priorities to ensuring accessibility. So, for instance, for the last 3 months, we've been hard at work saying, how do we engage municipalities? How do we engage provincial governments to work with us to ensure that at least they give us infrastructure so that we put offices. I think to date, we've already opened 5 offices, and that's just in 3 months, right? And these offices are not in town. We're opening them in the townships. We're opening them in the rural areas. You would know that just yesterday, we were launching the trucks, the mobile trucks, because we also say we want mobile offices so that these trucks can be able to reach far and wide, going to the rural areas, going to the outskirts. And what we like about these particular trucks is that they are fully fledged offices with Wi-Fi hotspots. Young people can really come in, and actually get free Wi-Fi and be able to do whatever it is that they're required to do. So we've been hard at work, and that's the first thing. The second issue is that we've actually, speaking about the issue of advocacy, because you'd know that as a youth agency, there's a lot of issues that are happening in government. And as much as we have our own program, we need to raise our voice sharply around the issues that affect young people. You mentioning the issue of fees must fall, for instance. It remains the considered view of the NYDA that actually government by now should move towards giving free education in this country. And as the voice of the young people, we must raise that in government. We've been calling, for instance, for 40% youth representation across the board. We've been saying that to deal with unemployment, for instance, the country need to legislate radical policies. And one of those, we're saying that at least companies and government must employ 40% of young people, and it must be law. In an instance where that does not happen, that company's license must be withdrawn. So these are the things that we are raising. We've called for youth set-asides, for instance. You would know that the budget of government currently is over R1 trillion. Out of that R1 trillion, 500 billion goes to procurement of goods and services. Now, there's a law called PPPA. This law places 90% of acquiring goods and services on price, 10% on whether you're youth, women, and we're saying that's wrong, because when you say 90% on price, you are actually advantaging those ones who have been in the system for a long time. So we're saying at least out of that 500 billion, let's put 30% aside for young people so that young people start to compete amongst themselves. So these are some of the things that we are raising in government in order to ensure that government programs and policies are in line with young people out there. So that's a role that we've been playing quite crucial.
Sure. And in terms of, relationship with stakeholders, I mean, the one thing we know for sure, that young people in this country are not lazy. Young people in this country are hungry for opportunities, The issue is really about proximity to resources, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's centers or institutions where they can access information, or just, capacity building around those issues, the various issues, for example. And you talk about rural youth. I mean, if you go to any township today, I mean, I come from a township, and young people, they wake up every morning and try to really, vuvuzenzela type of things, They're not lazy. They're really hungry for opportunities. What kind of relationships does the NYDA have, or will perhaps, want to get involved with existing stakeholders in various communities, issues around, for example, youth development groups that are already there, issues around, sports, arts and culture in those particular areas as well. And I know the agency has various, core areas, health and wellness, economic, development, participation as well, ensuring that young people are involved in the economy as well. And of course, no doubt, black women also get fair participation in the economy as well. What kind of stakeholder relationship are we seeing with NYD and in these kind of groups within societies?
Well, my office in particular, a large part of what I do is youth dialogues. So we've been meeting a lot of organized youth formations, whether it's NGOs, political formations, and so on. So we've been having those engagements, student movements, really saying to them that they must come in so that we move together. because we also don't want to be an agency that's there and thinking about, or maybe think that we know better, you know. So we've been doing that. We've engaged, for instance, just 2 weeks ago, we've had a meeting with youths in arts. We've been engaging, you know, creative arts people, whether it's people in crafts, whether it's people in theater, stage production, because largely those are people that we don't engage a lot. We tend to think that to deal with unemployment, young people must be skilled as marketers or this and that. But what about young people in that sector, you know? Which, by the way, we've been to the US, we've been everywhere else, and we've picked up that those governments invest a lot. Here in Africa, for instance, Nigeria invest a lot in creative arts.
The Nollywood, yes.
Exactly. That's why today they've flooded the market with, you know, Nigerian movies, music, and so on and so on. Now we're saying, where's South Africa in this thing?
Sure.
And you know that a lot of artists die. When they die, you actually realize that these guys actually die poor. So why is it, what is it in that industry that is not happening? And why is it that those who wish to enter the industry find it so hard to do it? So we've been having those type of discussions. We're going to have a discussion with the people in sports as well. You know, I mean, we've been worried that when you read media, you know, headlines, you realize that sports stars that we watch on television are actually not being paid sufficiently. You know, they're actually exploited. What do we do in that particular space? But how do we ensure that those ones who want to enter, we open that particular space? So I can assure you those are discussions that we're having each and every month to ensure that we cover the wide, you know, range of society, and ensure that young people, wherever they are found, we come to them, we speak to them, and we assist them to be able to realize their full potential.
Sure, Sfiso, let's go for a quick ad break, and when we return, I think we'll just delve also deeply into how people can access, you know, the services provided by the Youth Development Agency. So join us again after the quick ad break. Don't change the channel. Welcome back from the ad break. I'm still joined in studio by Sfiso from the National Youth Development Agency. Sfiso, I mean, before the ad break, you're talking about a lot of issues, you know, the fact that, you know, the NYDA as an agency is going out of its way to engage with young people from various sectors. It must be a lot of work. How is the agency in terms of, you know, dividing the work? I mean, this youth in sports, the youth in arts, those who are not in the schooling system, for example, those that desire to go into the schooling system as well. But those young people, you know, as well, that, you know, don't necessarily want to go into the schooling sector, that think that, you know, they can also, you know, participate in the economy in various ways, entrepreneurship, for example, as well. How is the agency in terms of dividing the work of the agency in trying to capture these young people? How are you going about this?
Well, firstly, I think, as I said just before the break, that myself, my office in particular, deals more with your youth dialogues and so on. Our executive deputy chairperson also deals with, you know, a sector that looks into international relations and so on. But what we have then done is that each and every board member then looks specifically into a sector. We've got, you know, former board members, Mr. Murulong, Mr. Pillay, Ms. Zandile Majozi, who bring in that wealth of experience, especially around the focal areas of the previous board, whether it's education and skills, the Solomon Mahlangu programs and so on. So they more playing on that particular role. But just to come back to the latter part of your question, look, I think the issue of skills development is quite a crucial aspect. We towards the end of this month, going to be launching a specific fund. In fact, it's two funds. The one fund is what we call the Youth Entrepreneurship Fund. Because, you know, currently the grant program only goes up to 100,000. So that's not sufficient, especially when we want to talk about young black people who will enter the industrialization space, that will enter into the sort of medium to bigger, you know, entrepreneurship space. We need to create a fund that responds to that. But at the same time, we're speaking about a skills fund. Now, this fund specifically will look at how do we develop welders. As you know, there are many young people, by the way, if you enter to any township, you have young people selling tires there. We have young people who are actually mechanics, who did not necessarily go through a formal schooling system, but they are quite good mechanics. Young people who are welders, young people who are... How do we get them into the system and ensure that we give them the correct skills to be able to grow their businesses to a point where I know one story that we've been able to take one young person who's actually selling tires, who's actually manufacturing the tires. So they take the old tires, they rethread them and so on. Now this young person today actually has about 4 outlets of that particular business. How do we ensure that this young person grows to a point where this tire business becomes a franchise, right? How do we ensure that young person who's a welder there in a corner, we ensure that we give them proper infrastructure, we ensure that we give them his training in terms of how to manage his finances. Because many of them, you come there, you give them money, he puts it in one pocket, takes change on another. You can't even measure whether that business is doing profit or not. So we want to enter that space and ensure that we give proper, guidance, proper financial support, and ensure that these young people grow. And I think quickly, we've gone on an international trip and we met with the Chicago Business Chamber, where we've now secured mentorship for over 50 young entrepreneurs in South Africa, where they will actually get mentors from USA, successful business people there that will actually hold their hands and take them through. We've also secured $2 million US, which amounts to about 30 million, already into this fund that I'm talking about. So we're moving towards ensuring that we really turn the game around. But I think quite crucial, and I've said this thing when we started, it's all about accessibility. How do we ensure that the agency ultimately, is at the doorstep of young people, particularly in the townships, in the rural areas, because that's where the potential is found. So that we don't have young people traveling long distances just to get these, services that I'm talking about.
Sure, Sfiso. I mean, we can't talk about poverty, but also we can't talk about poverty outside the fact that you have gendered poverty.
Yeah.
We have a situation where the face of poverty is the young woman, the young black woman in this country, or just black women in this country in particular. Is there specific deliberate efforts by the NYD in particular to look at young black women in this country and say there is an important need to, in particular, empower the young black women in this country, whether it be education and skills and development, whether it be capacity building on various sectors, whether it be entrepreneurship, whatever kind of efforts by the agency. Are those steps put in place to deliberately focus on young women in this country?
Well, currently the Office of the Executive Deputy Chair is actually driving women in business, women skills development. There's a deliberate program that deals with that, and I think we've deliberately said it must not be an issue of because it's August, because normally you would find that these things are done in August. And for instance, I'll make an example. We've raised with government, because there's a presidential working group on youth. We've said there that, we've asked the question, what has happened to the textile industry, for instance, in the country? Because there are many women-owned cooperatives that are busy with textile, but they are suffocated by the Chinese market and all those. But now we've then asked a very crucial question. Who's producing police uniform, for instance, in this country? Who's producing the army uniform? How do we ensure that we take those cooperatives, skill them in terms of producing such things, right? So that government begins to buy from those youth, women cooperatives that are actually in the textile industry. So, but also the fashion design industry, particularly for young women. How do we support it? Because currently, as you know, the fashion industry is this well-known sort of people, right? How do we ensure that the young women that are in that industry actually get, integrated? But quite importantly, we've been engaging with the Minister of Police in particular. I think in the next coming week, I'm actually with him visiting, the province of the Western Cape. But quite crucially, we've been worried about the killing of young women, the abuse of young women. What are we doing about it? I mean, this thing is even now escalating to a point where even people at high echelons, of power are actually being seen to be perpetrators of some of these things. How do we create laws that actually protect, particularly young women? Because as you know, even in university campuses, young women are no longer safe. Young women can no longer walk on the streets after certain hours. And we're saying that how do we ensure that there's laws that protect young women, but also we ensure that young women play a bigger role, in the economy of our country. So yes, we do have those programs and we'll continue to push them.
Absolutely. I mean, quite opportunistically of me, but I think also, the agency might want to consider also, as part of some sort of campaign with the police, I mean, self-defense classes for young women as well, accompanied by, reproductive health education, where, I mean, a lot of that is quite missing. So my submission to you, Chair, I think would be to, consider some of those issues, self-defense classes for young women. You're correct. Universities are no longer a safe space, If you study at night, the best option for you to sleep in the library and get up and go back to your flat or your residence the next morning, to ensure that you are safe. But, Sfiso, I'm listening to the show, I'm watching, and I'm thinking these are kind of the great opportunities that, the NYD is talking about. But how do I access them? You're talking about grants, for example. Where do I apply? Where do I get the information?
Well, as part of addressing that accessibility, just in the coming week, we're launching an app, a mobile app, because we know that young people are found, in the social media space. When you're dealing with your WhatsApp messages, just next to it, you will have an NYDA app, so that NYDA is literally on your fingers. But secondly, we have instructed, actually, because I was not happy with the website of the NYDA. We need an interactive website where young people can actually apply online. So already we've downloaded the grant application forms into the website, the information around how to access the Solomon Mahlangu Scholarship Fund and so on, the information around where do you find the nearest branch where you are. So it's www.nyda.gov.za. That's where you are able to get information. But at the same time, look, we opening offices. Every month, we're opening at least 3 offices. So we'll win the war of ensuring that the NYDA is found in each and every corner. In fact, I've had a discussion with, for instance, the Minister of Social Development. We have agreed that all the youth centers that, the Social Development Ministry has, let's ensure that there's an NYDA office there. We've already engaged 2 song centers. As you know, in Soweto, in the 2 song center, you find an NYDA. In Delmas, in Mpumalanga, in the 2 song center, you find. So all the 2 song centers in South Africa, we're looking at ensuring, because at least 2 song centers are a walking distance. That's where, even the old age grants and whatever, people get them there. So, but for now, we're saying to those young people who've got access to technology, go to the website. The app is coming to you next week. You'll be, and by the way, it's not just going to be an app that just gives you information. It's an app where you'll be able to actually download information, put in your email address, and you get whatever. The forms will be emailed to you. But I think also, lastly, the young people who are unemployed, particularly unemployed graduates, we have a jobs database. Young people can be able to email their CVs to jobs@nyda.gov.za, where, we've got a dedicated team of people that assist young people to look for jobs. So in other words, you've got a qualification in engineering, you've got a qualification in financial management. We look into the system. In fact, even your CV, we look at it. Is it written correctly? What is it that we need to do? We're also going to launch a technology very soon where actually young people will be interviewed, or they can actually download videos of themselves saying, this is who I am, this is what I do, and we upload them into this jobs database where we actually give to employers now to say, you no longer have an excuse. Here's a CV, here's the young person. You don't even have to call the young person into an interview. We've already got the whole package. So we're moving towards winning this particular war and ensuring that we use innovation, we use, creativity to ensure that we access and ensure that young people succeed.
And I mean, that's the language that young people speak, relatively the larger part of the young people. But of course, there'll always be those young people that can't be accessed. And we hope that the National Youth Development Agency as well, would find creative means to, to engage these young people as well in rural areas that might not necessarily have access to some of these services. But Sfiso, unfortunately, that's the only time we have tonight. Thank you so much for coming into the show. And I certainly hope that when the app goes live, you'll come back to the studio and we play around with the app and see how interactive the app can be, and also demonstrate to young people that this is available to you and this is how you can work the app. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you very much.
Unfortunately, that's the only time we have this evening. Thank you so much for watching. Join us again next week. Have a good evening.